Hello and welcome to the Stiles Council, the podcast that is slow and fast and gets to the line. My name's David Hartrick. Joining me is Christopher Nee. Chris, say hello.
Hello.
We have a lot of ground to cover because obviously we've had the squad announced for the World Cup. But being an England podcast, I did just want to mention we are doing this on the day that Ray Wilson has passed away. I am obviously a Huddersfield resident, though I was born in Brighton, as I always like to point out. Ray Wilson is an absolute legend in these parts and down at Huddersfield Town. He was there for about 12 years of his career. Started the 1966 World Cup final and will be sadly missed, I'm sure. So, with that sad news out of the way, we're sort of abandoning our normal format this week because we have a lot of ground to cover in terms of the squad announcement, which has come today. Now, we're not going to give you any spoilers as to what me or Chris think. We're going to go through the 4 separate areas of the team: goalkeeper, defender, midfielder, attackers. Me and Chris are going to give you what we predicted, what we hoped, and we'll compare to the actual and raise a few points along the way. So, reasonable amount of ground to cover, so let's get straight into it, Chris, if that's okay.
Do it.
Goalkeepers. This was fairly obvious, wasn't it? I predicted Jack Butland, Jordan Pickford and Joe Hart, but I hoped for Jordan Pickford, Jack Butland and Nick Pope. Yours?
Identical.
Yeah,
I think the idea that Joe Hart would be taken and not played had some real logic to it, and I wouldn't have agreed with it.
Yeah, I just didn't want him anywhere near. To be honest,
exactly.
he's Joe Hart has undoubtedly regressed in my mind, but also it's that horrible. I joked about it with Tom Adams from Eurosport in that he in his predicted squad he'd put Joe Hart in there, and his sort of thinking was that to take 3 relatively inexperienced goalkeepers would be seen as too much of a risk. But my point was that the big issue, if Joe Hart then, in inverted commas, impresses in training, does Gareth Southgate, who can be a bit risk adverse, sit there and go, do you know what? We've got a bloke who's played at major tournaments before. He's doing well in training. I'm going to put him in there. That was my big dread. So the fact that the actual goalkeepers we've got are Pickford, Butland and Pope, I think is very encouraging.
Certainly is. I'm with you. I don't want Joe Hart anywhere near this squad for various reasons, primarily quality. I hadn't actually thought about him having a negative impact while he was there. I just didn't really see the point of having him there because he wasn't going to play. I am sceptical about the value of his experience, and we don't need a chest-beating third-choice goalkeeper.
No, we don't need a cheerleader,
no.
Do we? So I just, that was my big thing. I just genuinely couldn't see the point to taking him. So I'm really pleased with Southgate for making let's be honest, what is a big decision, because this is a bloke who's got a lot of friends in the press, as today has shown with various people mounting a defence from sort of Henry Winter to John Cross. And the thing is, Jordan Pickford is a very exciting young goalkeeper. I think Nick Pope is a very exciting young goalkeeper. And Jack Butland is he's in terms of experience, he is a little bit ahead of the other two, but he is also an excellent goalkeeper. So I quite like the fact that I honestly couldn't tell you who's number 1 there, Chris. I quite like the competition.
Yeah, the competition is good. I think we've both suggested in the past that Southgate might look at Butland as his first choice. I'm of a mind that it might be Pickford. I think he's probably favourite at this point.
I think Butland is the better goalkeeper, but I think Pickford's distribution comes into it.
Yeah.
And the way England could be looking to play, I think that's quite a big part of it, really. So I can sort of completely understand that. But so yeah, goalkeepers then, the actual goalkeepers, Pickford, Butland and Pope. I think we're both giving that a pretty big tick, aren't we, Chris?
Absolutely.
Defenders, I'm going to split this, Chris. I want to look at the fullbacks first.
Okay.
So let's go for the fullbacks we hoped. I had Kyle Walker down. It's debatable whether you class him fullback or centre-back, depending how England play. Ashley Young, Ryan Bertrand and Trent Alexander-Arnold. That's who I hoped for. Who were your hoped for fullbacks?
Yeah, more than similar. I had Trent Alexander-Arnold, Ashley Young, Ryan Bertrand, Kyle Walker, but I'm actually not going to put him in this category, and Kieran Trippier.
We both, I think we predicted pretty similar. I predicted Trent Alexander-Arnold. He always felt like he'd played his way into a position where it was impossible to ignore. Ashley Young, I thought he would take Bertrand. I thought he would trust Bertrand. And did I say Kyle Walker at the start? I can't remember. But and Kyle Walker, obviously. I think Bertrand is an excellent player. And I think he's quite underrated. But what did you actually predict, Chris?
Fullback-wise, again, Kyle Walker, either or. But Ryan Bertrand, Kieran Trippier, Ashley Young and Trent Alexander-Arnold, who, again, I thought was a shoo-in.
Yeah.
Not surprised at all that he's there.
So the actual fullbacks that we've got, Alexander-Arnold, Trippier, again the Kyle Walker thing, which I think we'll come to sort of separately, Danny Rose, Ashley Young, and I would also include Fabian Delph in there.
Yeah. He's
down on most lists as a midfielder, but I think he's there because I think it's quite... I know as a Villa fan you have feelings towards Delph, but I think Southgate's looking at Delph and thinking decent option at fullback if required, but also an auxiliary midfielder, which is the position England are weakest in if required too.
Yeah, exactly. I think the BBC's graphic has got it spot on. Basically, they haven't done it by position, but they've kind of gradually done it by position. And Young and Delph are between Trippier and Dyer.
Yeah.
And that's where they are, isn't it? Those are two players who can and probably will be used in various positions.
So, to go through these individually, Danny Rose, I didn't have in my predicted or in my hoped for because I don't think he's had a great season and I think he's struggled a little bit. But there is some joined up thinking in a player who's sort of firmly established in the squad, and I think he's quite a popular player in the squad, isn't there, Chris?
Yeah, there's definitely logic to it. I think he was 24th or 25th or thereabouts in both my predicted and hoped for squads.
Same
really.
Here.
My wish list, if you count Kyle Walker and Ashley Young, had 5 fullbacks, and it is for that reason and that reason alone that Danny Rose didn't make my cut.
Mm. And I mean, it's a legitimate reason, isn't it? Let's be honest. With how 23 is such a sort of arbitrary number in many ways, isn't it? And it's how you cut your cloth, really. And depending how England play, I don't think Rose has had a great season, but I don't, for any stretch, think he's a bad player. I think Young and Delph have both played their way in with, I mean, really brilliant sort of reinventions over the season, and completely there on merit. Before we go on to the sort of one of the big headlines from the squad, I just want to talk about Trippier a little bit. I like him. I'm always surprised when I look on Twitter that there is a sort of subsect of Spurs fans who really don't rate him. Is that just in comparison to what's come before, or I'm not... I'll be honest, I'm not seeing him have a bad game myself, but I'm guessing he must have bad games in all the other games I don't see.
Yeah, he must have some bad games. I think the comparison with Walker is a large chunk of it, and to be fair, it is a step down from Walker. And I think seeing Walker go on and progress and adapt is probably not helping Trippier's cause at all. I think he's not a glamorous player, is he? That's a big part of it. He is more of a fullback's fullback than Kyle Walker would be. And if you are, primarily just pretty good at your job and also able to cross, then it's the creation of goals that is what you're going to be measured on, I think. And while his crossing is very decent, I think his defending is what makes him a decent right back. And Walker has that slightly sharper attacking edge, I think. However, I think it's genuinely quite harsh. If it weren't for Alexander-Arnold's late run into the squad, I think Kyle Walker's little mini reinvention in an England shirt made Trippier first choice.
Let's go on to then perhaps the biggest story to come out of this squad. Alexander-Arnold, absolutely there on merit. I think we would both agree. First game, do you pitch him in there? Do you give him a run? Because he's obviously going to get minutes in the warm-ups, or there would be absolutely no point to him being there. I'll tell you my personal view on this. I think you've got a kid who has had a fabulous season, can take a very good free kick, is a very good attacking option, and is absolutely high on life as we speak. First season he's going to play in a Champions League final. If you are ever going to pick him, now's probably the time to get him into that side, isn't it? Yeah,
I'm completely in agreement. If he can play in a Champions League final, he can play against Tunisia in a World Cup.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
It's that's. I don't mean any disrespect to the opposition there at all, but it's not like throwing him in against Germany.
Yeah,
when he hasn't got any big game experience, he's fine. I think he's going to be fine in that situation. He's played in. Frankly, England fans we both are, but he's already had a bigger game than this.
Yeah. So I was pleased. I don't think it's the bravest decision Southgate could have made in regards to this squad, but I do think it is. I spoke to Dan Story and Ryan Keeney last night while we were playing foot golf, and I was explaining that I wanted at least one person in this squad who gives Southgate a bit of a free pass. One person who we can say, well, at least he tried something, at least he bought so-and-so. And it feels like he could have been a lot bolder, and we'll get to that in attacking options. But it feels like Alexander-Arnold is a good shout and is a good positive step, really. And again, we know Southgate is a little bit risk adverse, but he's trying to be bold. And I think it reflects, though that fullback selection, I think reflects pretty well on him, Chris, because you're looking at, let's be frank, you're looking at Delph, Young, Rose, Alexander-Arnold certainly, and Walker if he was played out there, Trippier to a lesser extent. All very good attacking options, aren't they? Very good going forward.
That's what we're going to need. I think the system that England will play at the World Cup lives and dies on its fullbacks. And that is a very, very capable crop, and in certain examples, a very good crop, an exciting crop of fullback / wingback players. Alexander-Arnold is the safest uncapped teenager selection for a World Cup you could ever hope to see. We both knew he was going to be selected. We both wanted him in there. Nobody can make a case for him not to be ready to at least go in the squad. So very excited by it. Has that little bit of flexibility as well, position wise. So that's also a group of players who I think, with the exception of not really anybody, they could all play somewhere else, can't they? Yeah. Which is why you can have so many of them. It looks at a lot of fullbacks, that.
Yeah. Central defenders. I hoped we would have John Stones and Harry Maguire, who I think is arguably the sort of potential future England partnership of, 35 to 40 games together. Chris Smalling and Phil Jones, because I think they are far better when they play together than when they are apart. So I was looking at it from the point of view of two partnerships, essentially.
Okay.
I predicted John Stones, Gary Cahill, Chris Smalling and Phil Jones. I didn't think Maguire would actually make the cut. Your hoped for and predicted, Chris?
My choice was Phil Jones, brackets Kyle Walker, Harry Maguire and John Stones.
Yeah.
And what I was expecting was Jones, Maguire and Stones and Walker.
Yeah. So we've actually got in the squad John Stones, Harry Maguire, Phil Jones and Gary Cahill. Let's look at Walker separately right at the start. He will be deployed as part of a three-man defence at the back. I think it's absolutely certain in certain games, and I think he's proved okay, hasn't he? He's we haven't seen him tested against really world-class opposition in a competitive game, but he's certainly looked capable in the minutes he's had doing the job, hasn't he?
He did. He's a smart player, he's a good defender, and he's learning season by season. And the way he's adapted to that right-sided centre-back position against decent strikers, let's be fair. Not, as you say, world-class and not in competitive games, but they're no mugs. Immobile in particular is liable to cause any centre-backs issues. So I think he has earned a starting place, and I think he's probably earned it at centre-back because the full-back options around him are, to me, I was going to say stronger than the centre-back options. They're more exciting than the centre-back options.
I think with centre-backs, partnerships are important, and I think there is no way to sort of form a bond in a few friendly games before the tournament between three specific defenders. It's almost not in a defender's mindset. You have to do it over 15, 20 games, as Chelsea did a couple of seasons ago, for example. But I think as long as you've got a couple who are on the same wavelength, you're all right. And I think Jones and Cahill are both excellent defenders, both experienced defenders. I think both are prone to the odd lapse, which means they get absolutely hammered. Phil Jones gets absolutely hammered for making a face. But Stones and Maguire is the sort of interesting side of it for me, because Maguire, certainly at the end of the season, he didn't have a brilliant end to the season, but he's had a really good season overall, I think it would be fair to say. Stones, that's not quite the case, is it, Chris? But he's still here in an England shirt. Are we happy about that?
I didn't see a way for him not to be in the squad. And I think despite wobbles, and we see wobbles in an England shirt as well, of course, you have to look a little bit to the future here. And the fact of the matter is, John Stones is going to be playing for England in 5, 6, 7 years' time. And I'd rather he was experienced at that point.
Yeah, I agree. I think Stones has got it all. I think the problem is he's at a club where you not only need to have it all, you've also got to have 50% of everything else. And the standards Man City have set over the course of the season are so high that, so many people would fall short, really. I'm pleased he's there. I thought Chris Smalling was quite possibly going to go. I'm quite glad Smalling is not. Is that a bit too harsh?
It may be, but I agree with it. It probably came down to a decision for us. I mean, rather than Southgate, I don't want to assume anything about his thought process between Smalling and Maguire, for example, because Cahill, you know why he's there. Jones and Stones are there to start matches at the World Cup. You have Kyle Walker as an option. then you have another pick. And I'm taking Maguire in that situation because I think he offers something different and Chris Smalling doesn't.
Well, that's this. What I said in the sort of intro to this bit, I think Stones and Maguire realistically are an England partnership that are going to have 30 to 40 caps together potentially. So I absolutely wanted him in there, but I just felt, I know Southgate had dropped Smalling, but Smalling's been playing towards the back end of the season because of Baye's injury. Again, I think he's much better with Jones. As soon as you split the two of them up, they both look a little bit wobbly, but I think Jones is the more adaptable of the two. Yeah. So are you sort of a mind as I am that if you're looking at partnerships there, you're looking at Jones and Cahill and you're looking at Stones and Maguire, aren't you? Well,
you need to think of the third player as well, don't you? Because I think the prospect of playing three at the back is very real for England.
Well, the third player is Kyle Walker, isn't it?
In which case, you're looking, I think, at Stones. With all that comes with that. So it may be that Maguire gets the nod in that regard. I think what you've got there, in the short term at least, for this competition, is lots of partnerships that could work. Not just in the middle, but also if you're looking at Stones with Walker, then Trippier outside them, there's a couple of partnerships in there that have some background anyway. Then you have Ashley Young as a possibility at left back in a defence that has Phil Jones in it.
Yeah.
So there are little connections all over that back line. Delph as well, So I think rather than it being a Stones and Maguire or a Cahill and a Jones plus Walker, what we actually have is a pretty deep well of options.
Yeah, well, what a phrase to then move on to midfield. This is where I think it'd be fair to say it starts to get slightly. This is the one area that is a bit depressing. But I hoped for 6 midfielders: Dyer, who again can fill in at centre back if required, of course. Chris. Henderson, who I'm not a massive fan of, but has certainly played his way into that side without an issue. Lingard, Shelvey, Loftus-Cheek and Wilshere. I will have a little word on the absentees, Shelvey and Wilshere. But I predicted Dyer, Henderson, Livermore, Lallana, Lingard and Wilshere. Chris, you're hoped for?
I went for Dyer, Henderson, Loftus-Cheek, Ali, Lallana, Wilshere and Lingard. And squad member number 24, and the only either or I had just before confirming this was Shelvey versus Wilshere. Yeah. I think we needed at least one of those two.
Yeah, your predicted
was Dyer, Henderson, Loftus-Cheek, Ali, Lallana, Wilshere and Lingard.
Yeah. Well, I've shoved Ali into the attackers and Lingard into the attackers. I think we'll do that and we'll just look at sort of our central midfield options.
Yeah, I think midfield and attack on a squad list at this point is getting a little silly.
Yes, yeah. Dyer, I think, is very good, neat and tidy. Henderson is obviously there and will be there for quite a while. Loftus-Cheek was the slightly sort of left field choice, but I think again has been excellent over the course of the season, hasn't he, Chris?
Yeah, and it's nice to know that we're able to put him in predicted squads as well as hoped for squads, and have the faith in the manager to have seen the same sort of prospect. I think the fact that he did well in an England shirt really helped him.
Yeah, I would agree. I completely agree with that, and he did do very, very well. And I quite like the fact that he's coming into this tournament pretty fresh as well.
Yeah, well, he was out for a bit, wasn't he? And he came back and just kind of hit the ground running, really.
Yeah, so I'm I'm pleased he's in there, but I sort of look at our true central midfield options, and you look at Dyer, Henderson and Loftus-Cheek, Delph, who can do a job there if required. It is thin, isn't it? Let's be honest, it is thin. But, you know, there's a way England can play where that doesn't necessarily hurt us as much as we think. It's just a frightening prospect when you actually start to look around other nations' World Cup squads, isn't it?
I don't think Delph is in here as a central midfielder, but he can do more than a job there. If he can find anything close to his central midfield form for Villa, he's perfectly adequate in there. However, I don't think we'll see him there that much. So I think there is kind of I don't know if it's a weakness, because it's more of a lack of breadth and a lack of creativity from deep within the central midfield. Because what we're looking at ultimately is Dyer and Henderson being in there. And Henderson, in the last couple of friendlies, did very well at actually playing probing passes. And he looked so much the better for it. And England looked so much the better for him doing it. So hopefully that little bit of creativity that you do need from midfield, even in the system that England will play, because the burden elsewhere will be heavy otherwise. It just gives us a problem with, you know, any form of injury, any loss of form, any reshuffle that needs to happen, and it always happens in the World Cup. You know, the team that starts the first game will be quite different, I'm sure, to any team that gets to a fourth or even a fifth. Yeah. And what we don't have is flexibility in that specific position. And I think in Shelvey and Wilshere, you had flexibility to move it around, but also flexibility to apply them differently, and that's the one little bonus that Southgate's turned down for me.
Yeah, you obviously you only take one of Shelvey and Wilshere.
I think so.
Wilshere missed the last game of the season. We know that he's mainly made of matchsticks and sweet wrappers, but I said to Dan last night, I wonder if this is where I quite like the boldness of just going straight in with your 23, but I wonder if that's where a provisional squad might have helped in terms of just having a couple of games to just have a look at Wilshere and possibly Shelvey, and just make a slightly more educated decision a little bit closer to the tournament. But I can understand why they've both been left out. That a lot of the theories around Shelvey's omission appear to centre on squad harmony and a couple of incidents he's had in the past and a bit of discipline, and I completely get that. But I just think there is a serious depth problem there, and as you quite rightly said, Chris, the minute we have an issue, we have a big issue. I think Delph can do a job there, but it's. I would have liked this. We've talked about this before, Chris, between us, but there is a plan B where England bring Jamie Vardy on to play on the shoulder of the last defender, and you want a Wilshere or a Shelvey clipping those balls through to him, playing between the lines and using his pace. And I feel we have lost quite a chunk of that plan B.
That's the specific reason why I had one of them in my squad. I'm in a funny position with Shelvey because I despite not actually including him, I do find myself opposing that decision more often than trying to defend it. It really was just, it was almost a toss of a coin between Wilshere and Shelvey, but the idea that we haven't got either of them, I think is a shame. Yeah, I did think he would pick Wilshere, and I think it's just purely down to the fact that there just seemed to be this, probably for the reasons that you've outlined, this feeling in the air that Southgate and Shelvey wasn't going to be something that we were going to see. It just seems more of a fan of Wilshere. It doesn't quite vibe with Shelvey. I never got the feeling that Shelvey was going to be able to play himself in.
Yeah, well, we're talking round something really here, so we may as well talk directly at it. I think the problem is Shelvey has faced a racism charge, and England and people within the FA have learned over past squads and past experiences at major tournaments that harmony is one of the most difficult things to get right. And it does seem that there's a lot of quite educated and well-placed people who seem to think that's what's kept Shelvey out. But what I think, I've seen quite a bit of Newcastle this year, and what Shelvey is absolutely brilliant at is getting the ball off the defenders and immediately picking out a winger / wide forward, or going very direct through the centre. And I don't see that off Henderson unless he does it in all the games I don't see. I don't see that from Dyer. I don't see that from Loftus-Cheek. I didn't ever really see that from Dell. So I do think it's limited us. But
yep.
There are reasons and justifications, and you have to say that Southgate's far better placed than we are. We just have to trust him at the moment. But as I said, I just wonder if a provisional squad might have just given us a couple of games just to have a closer look. But, so be it. We're going to look at attacking options now. I want to look at... I think let's just have a look at the sort of attacking midfielders / wide forwards first, Chris, and then we'll talk about our strikers. And I'm going to put Rashford in as a striker.
Okay.
So we'll talk about him in a striking berth. So, in terms of what I hoped for, it was Sterling, Ali, and Jadon Sancho. Without ever thinking we would actually get Sancho in the squad, and Lingard, obviously, who I think has surprised everyone. What I predicted we would get is Lallana, Lingard, Sterling, Ali, and Danny Welbeck. So, run me through yours.
So, what I wanted was, if we're counting them again, Ali, Lallana was in mine, Lingard, Sterling, and Sancho. And the predicted ones would have included Ali, Lallana, Lingard, Sterling, and Welbeck.
What we've got is Lingard, Sterling, Welbeck, and Ali, and I think pretty obvious while they're all there. But the one that I really like, Danny Welbeck, and I've joked about it on other podcasts and what have you, but Welbeck in an England shirt always looks far better to me than Welbeck in a club shirt. He's never really let us down. My issue was that potentially that was the place that I would have taken him out the squad and given to Wilshere or Shelvey. Yeah. That was where I thought there was the room. Because I'm looking at Welbeck and I don't think he starts in front of any of our attacking options in any of the positions. But, it's one of those where I'm also not particularly adverse to him being in the side either, Chris.
No, well, I've been thinking in terms of a front five for the squad. And I won't go through the strikers particularly, but what I hoped for was a little bit different. But my predictions for five forwards are the five forwards, if you want to look at it that way, that were named in the squad. I think that front line, I know you've got your wide players in a slightly different setup here, but the five that I named are the five in the squad. I don't think there was any question over any of them, and I'm including Sterling and Welbeck in that five of those two players. I think you're right about Welbeck. So we're talking about Welbeck as if he's a winger here. I think that's the only chance he's got of playing. It's not necessarily his strongest position.
No, I think the interesting one for me, and the one I'm actually quite excited about, is the fact that we've got Ali, who hasn't had the best of seasons, but was certainly coming into form at the back end of the season. But you've now got him being pushed all the way by Lingard, who didn't finish the season in his strongest form, I would argue, but absolutely there on merit, has scored his first England goal. And it's quite exciting to have two options in that creative position behind a front three, shall we say, or, almost as part of a front five or front four, however you want to play, really.
And for reasons we've already outlined, important position.
And to have two very good options there, both pushing each other, both will want minutes as well. Both are the type of characters that want to play football. I think that's suddenly looks really quite strong. And then you've got Sterling, who is absolutely brilliant, but England play a very different way to Man City, don't they, Chris?
Yeah, I think Sterling is of a quality at the moment where he will happily play in differing systems and differing setups and have a case of being the best player on the pitch. I think we can absolutely rely on him, and he may have games where his finishing's not up to scratch, and he may have games where he's not quite having joy in that little channel that he likes to spend his time in. But even in a World Cup, I think we can pretty much guarantee that we will get games out of him where he looks like he's really got that spark. So system-wise, I'm not too fussed, really. I think he's fulfilled his potential to such an extent that you stick him either side of a striker here, and he's going to be a threat.
Yeah, I agree. Let's just talk about a couple of absentees. I thought he would take Lallana because Lallana's done a reasonable job for him before, but I'm quite glad he hasn't. Only started one game this season, and I think there are one or two rumours swirling around as to what may be going on there. So, I'm pleased he hasn't just sort of fallen back on somebody who is trusted in the past. He's actually looked at the present and gone, yeah, it's not the right time. But there was a lot of talk about Sancho, Lookman, potential wild card players. I would have loved Sancho to be in there, but it is very, very early, incredibly early in his career, and it's more from, again, that sort of rolling the dice, free hit player in the squad, who looks really, really good. So let's get him in there and hope he does something. But I can understand why he's not there. I can understand why Southgate's gone for people he trusts. It's the biggest possible tournament he's going to play in, isn't it? So it's obvious he's going to go with people he trusts.
He was never in the squad. Sancho was in my squad, but Welbeck was in my prediction and is in the final squad, and I think that was a fairly obvious call. They're called wildcards for a reason. I think anybody who is surprised that Sancho isn't in the squad possibly needs to spend less time around glue. It was just never on the cards.
No. So, let's talk strikers. Kane, Rashford and Vardy.
Yeah.
We basically...
Tick.
Yeah, it predicted, hopeful, actual, never really in doubt. And Harry Kane has never, needs to become a tournament player for England. Jamie Vardy is certainly an excellent plan B. Far better than people give him credit for. Scorer of the goal of the season for me.
Yeah, and in
Rashford,
good form as well. He feels like Jamie Vardy again.
Yeah, he does. But Rashford is, I think, the interesting one, because Rashford is the one that feels to me that he's going to start out wide, but he's going to be the player that they're going to look to play as an auxiliary striker, essentially.
Yeah.
He's the one that they're going to look to sort of supplement Kane's goals. Sterling creativity, Rashford to be on the end of that creativity is how it feels to me. Is that a sort of reasonable assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. I think relying on Sterling for goals you'll get half a job out of him.
Yeah,
I think what we're going to have is effectively it'll be a front three with Kane flanked by Rashford, who's doing the one job on the probably on the left, and Sterling doing a very slightly different job on the right, with Ali and Lingard available to play in behind them. Rashford is not going to be hugging the touchline for 90 minutes.
No.
And he is definitely going to be expected to contribute goals, and I think he will be able to do so. And we've seen how effective he can be coming in from the left-hand side. He's not going to get a start through the middle. What I absolutely have faith in is that he will give us all of the qualities that he has from a slightly more left starting position as well.
And it's the way that England front three with a one behind works is it very quickly becomes a 2 and a 2. And I think to have Sterling and Ali behind Rashford and Kane fills me with hope that this is not an England attack with Wayne Rooney weighing them down like a canal barge behind them. You know, this when you're looking at Harry Kane as potentially being the slowest player, bear in mind Harry Kane is very, very quick. That's a good thing. And if England can play a bit of possession football at the back, break at the right times, that is a front 3, 4, 5, even however you want to do it, that is well capable of getting goals. And I think I feel pretty confident with that Kane, Rashford, Sterling front three, with Vardy to come on, with Lingard and Ali sort of vying for position behind them. It's not going to be attack that is going to let us down, is it, Chris, this time?
I think we've got a real threat. I do. I think the key to progressing in this tournament is not going to be that we struggle to attack. It's going to be making sure that we give those attacking players a base from which to work. And very possibly that is why Wilshere and Shelvey missed out.
Yeah, I agree. So, squad done.
Yeah,
and
you wouldn't want to be trying to get a free kick out of this, like, would you? I'm not getting on the ball in a squad that's got Alexander-Arnold and Ali and Rashford and Kane and Ashley Young, Sterling. God, set pieces, please.
I honestly think that there are a couple of things I might have changed, but I think this is a pretty decent stab at getting 23 players out of the options we've got. I might have changed a couple as we've discussed, but yeah, this is positive. And Hart's omission points to a Southgate who is going to make some bolder decisions, and I think is not going to rely on the past, which I think is refreshing, isn't it, Chris?
It is refreshing. Are you... Is this the worst England squad ever?
No, not by a long shot. Just because the thing is, I spoke about it on the other pod, Chris, as well. I think part of a squad is that you don't want huge talent caps from your best player to your worst.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've got that. I think we've got a very good spread here. And what people forget about the golden generation is you would have 5 or 6 leading lights, but they would often have to be supplemented with players that were like nowhere near the quality. I'm talking about people like Danny Mills, etc., etc. So I think this is quite a good balanced squad. I think this is a squad that you can't see falling out. I think that which is important. And the notion of it being the worst is it's an inquantifiable thing anyway. But I look at that squad and it just doesn't feel anything like the worst to me. You?
No, not at all. Not at all. Pretty happy, all told. I think it's a decent squad. I think there are players in there who can make individual contributions, and I think it has that balance that's so important in a squad. It would be silly to say that a squad full of Premier League players doesn't carry egos, but it doesn't feel like it has quite the problematic level of ego that some of the previous squads have had. And I think if you're looking at this squad and you think it's the worst England squad ever, I think you've got a problem with just looking at the big names and making some assumption that Frank Lampard was going to be at his absolute best, or Steven Gerrard was going to be at absolute best, Wayne Rooney. And they weren't always for England. And I think
can Lampard and Gerrard play together, Chris?
I'm not getting into that. I got myself in trouble once. I feel like this is a squad that can create a team. I'm happy with this. Again, like you, there were one or two that I would have changed, but given what's available and what we predicted not being that far off, and the fact that some of the players that we wanted in our squad, so we tried to be realistic in our hoped for squads as well. There was no point in taking Henderson out. There's no point in taking Dyer out.
Yeah, because
it would just be a pointless exercise. However, I don't think I would be a million miles away from Southgate, and there is a lack of depth of talent outside this squad. The pool is shallow at the moment, but I feel like we have almost all the tools here to come away from Russia having not disappointed.
It feels progressive, and that's at this point in our England supporting lives, that feels like enough.
Yeah,
it feels like you don't sort of ask for any more than that. So, anyway, squad's covered. Just to go through it again. So Gareth Southgate has announced goalkeepers: Shilton Woods, Seaman. Defenders: Stevens, Pearce, Walker, Butcher, Parker, Wright, Dorigo. Midfielders: Webb, Robson, Waddle, Barnes, McMahon, Platt, Hodge, Gascoigne, and Stephen. And forwards: Beardsley, Lineker, and Bull, which I think we're both pretty pleased about.
Yeah, Seaman looks to be wincing though. Why is Seaman wincing over in the corner?
Bad finger, mate. Bad finger. No. Don't worry. I've got Dave Besant on speed dial. You've been listening to the Stiles Council. You can find us on our Twitter output at Sphinx Football. Is it Sphinx FTBL?
Yep.
And where else, Chris?
The same on Facebook and various bits on Instagram if I get to Wembley anytime soon. But mainly, you and I chatting England on our own Twitter accounts, I suspect, Chris M. Nee and David Hartrick.
Yes. Thanks for joining us, and we'll speak to you in a couple of weeks when we should have more exciting things to discuss, and we will be very, very excited about the upcoming World Cup at that point. Almost unbearable, some would say.
Almost.
See you later.
See ya.